My girlfriend said, "I'm never having kids. Pregnancy will ruin my body." I said, "That's your choice." She thought I'd spend years trying to convince her. Instead, I packed my things and left. When she asked why I was giving up so easily, I said, "Because I want a family, and you don't. Neither of us should have to sacrifice the future we want." Original post. I, 28 male, had been with Valerie, 27F, for 4 years. We met at a craft beer festival in Denver, Colorado. I'm a high school science teacher, and she works as a graphic designer for a marketing firm downtown. We moved in together 2 years ago into a nice apartment near City Park. Things were great. We loved hiking in the Rockies, trying new restaurants, and just hanging out with our friends. But there was one big thing we had never fully agreed on: kids. When we first started dating, Valerie told me she wasn't sure if she wanted children. She wanted to focus on her career and travel. I told her that was fine for now, as we were still young, but I definitely wanted a family someday. I pictured a noisy house, weekend soccer games, and messy family dinners. She just kind of smiled and changed the subject. I figured we'd cross that bridge when we got there. Well, we got there. A few months ago, my older brother, Mark, and his wife had their second baby. We went to visit them in the suburbs. Holding my tiny nephew made my heart swell. On the drive back to our apartment, I told Valerie how happy I was for them and how much I looked forward to having our own kids one day. Valerie got really quiet. Then, she looked out the window and said, "I need to tell you something. I've made up my mind. I am never having kids." I was stunned. I pulled the car over. "Never? Like, not ever?" "No," she said firmly. "I like our life the way it is. I don't want the responsibility, the lack of sleep, or the financial drain. And honestly, pregnancy will ruin my body. I work hard to stay in shape. I don't want to go through all of that." I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. "But Valerie, you knew I wanted a family. We talked about this." "We talked about it years ago," she replied, crossing her arms. "People change. I figured you'd eventually see how great our child-free life is. Besides, you can just be the cool uncle to Mark's kids." I didn't say much for the rest of the drive. When we got home, I went straight to our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I felt completely betrayed. She hadn't just changed her mind. She had assumed I would change mine to match hers. She didn't care about my dreams at all. I took a deep breath. I knew what I had to do. It was going to hurt, but staying would hurt more. I walked out to the living room. Valerie was sitting on the couch, watching TV like nothing had happened. "That's your choice," I said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "What is?" "Not having kids. That's your choice, and I respect it." A smug little smile played on her lips. "See? I knew you'd understand. It's for the best, really. We can plan that trip to Italy next year now." "No, Valerie," I said, my voice steady. "You don't understand. I respect your choice, but it's not my choice. I want a family." Her smile faded. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm leaving." I turned around, went to the closet, and pulled out my large duffel bag. I started throwing my clothes into it. Jeans, t-shirts, my favorite sweaters. Valerie jumped off the couch and ran into the room. "Wait, what are you doing? You can't just leave. We've been together for 4 years. And in those 4 years, you decided my dreams didn't matter," I replied, shoving my shoes into a separate bag. "I didn't say they didn't matter," she argued, her voice rising. "I just thought we could compromise. I thought you loved me enough to stay." "I do love you," I said, looking her in the eye. "But I can't compromise on this. You want a child-free life. I want a family. Neither of us should have to sacrifice the future we want." She stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. She really thought I would spend years trying to convince her, begging her to change her mind. She thought she had all the power. You're giving up so easily," she cried, tears welling up in her eyes. "Don't I mean anything to you?" "You mean a lot to me," I told her. "But I'm not giving up on my future. I'm just giving up on us." I packed the rest of my essentials, grabbed my laptop, and headed for the door. Valerie was sobbing on the couch, begging me to stay and talk about it. But there was nothing left to talk about. The deal breaker had been spoken. I walked out, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind me. I spent the night on my brother's couch, feeling empty but strangely free. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since I left. The first few days were awful. I missed Valerie, our apartment, our routines. But every time I felt like calling her, I pictured myself 10 years from now, resentful and childless, and that stopped me. I moved into a small, furnished studio apartment across town, closer to my school. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. Valerie hasn't made this easy. She's been blowing up my phone with texts and voicemails. At first, she was angry, calling me selfish for throwing away 4 years over something that might not even happen. Then, she got sad, sending me long messages about how much she missed me and how empty the apartment felt. Last week, she even showed up at my school after the final bell. I was grading papers in my classroom when she walked in. "We need to talk," she demanded, looking exhausted and desperate. "Valerie, please," I said, standing up. "Not here." "Then where?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You won't answer my calls. I just want to understand why you didn't fight for us." "I told you why," I said, keeping my distance. "We want different things." "But we could have worked it out," she pleaded. "Maybe we could have adopted an older kid later. Or just gotten a dog." I shook my head. "That's not what I want, Valerie. You knew that. You just hoped I'd settle." She glared at me, her sadness turning back into anger. "You're making a huge mistake. You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I said softly, "but I know I'd regret staying even more." She stormed out, slamming the classroom door. Since then, her texts have been mostly angry and bitter. I finally had to block her number. I need a clean break to heal and move on. My brother and his wife have been amazing, letting me come over for dinner and play with my nephew. It reminds me of why I made this hard choice. Update 2. It's been 6 months now. Things have finally settled down. The sting of the breakup has faded, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. I'm focusing on my job, saving money, and spending time with my friends and family. I found out through a mutual friend, Sarah, that Valerie had moved out of our old apartment. She couldn't afford the rent on her own and had to downsize to a much smaller place in the suburbs. Ironically, the kind of place she used to make fun of. Sarah also told me that Valerie had been telling everyone a very different version of our breakup. According to Valerie, I had abandoned her out of the blue because I was having a midlife crisis at 28 and wanted to date younger women. She painted herself as the victim, claiming I had strung her along for years. Hearing this made me angry, but it also confirmed that I made the right decision. Valerie was incapable of taking responsibility for her choices. She had tried to trap me into a life I didn't want, and when it failed, she tried to ruin my reputation. I decided not to confront her about the lies. I didn't want to get dragged back into her drama. Instead, I simply corrected the record with our mutual friends, telling them the truth calmly and clearly. Most of them knew how much I wanted kids and understood why I left. A few took her side, and I let those friendships fade. It was a good way to see who my real friends were. I'm starting to date again, slowly. Nothing serious yet, but I'm making sure to be upfront about my goals from the very beginning. No more hoping things will change down the line. If a woman doesn't want a family, we politely part ways. It's refreshing to be so clear about what I want. Final update. It's been 3 years since I walked out of that apartment. It feels like a lifetime ago. A lot has changed, and I'm happier than I ever thought possible. 2 years ago, I met Qley. She's a pediatric nurse, kind-hearted, funny, and beautiful. On our first date, at a cozy little Italian restaurant, the topic of kids came up. I held my breath, waiting for her answer. Qley's eyes lit up. "I definitely want kids," she said with a warm smile. "I love my job, but my dream is to have a loud, chaotic, happy family of my own." I almost cried right there into my spaghetti. We connected instantly, and our relationship moved fast, but it felt incredibly right. We got married last summer in a beautiful outdoor ceremony in the mountains. And the best part? Qley is now 6 months pregnant with our first child, a little girl. We are over the moon. We just bought a nice house in a quiet neighborhood with a big backyard, perfect for a swing set and a dog. As for Valerie, I hadn't heard anything about her for years until a few weeks ago. I ran into Sarah, our old mutual friend, at the grocery store. "You won't believe what happened with Valerie," Sarah said, leaning in close. I braced myself, expecting more drama. "What is it?" "She got married about a year ago to some guy she met online," Sarah told me. "He was wealthy, older, and totally agreed with her about not having kids." "Okay," I said, confused. "Good for her, I guess." Sarah shook her head. "No, you don't understand. 6 months after the wedding, he sat her down and told her he had changed his mind. He wanted an heir. He demanded they start trying for a baby immediately." I raised my eyebrows. "Wow, how did she handle that?" "She refused, obviously, Sarah said. She reminded him of their agreement. But he didn't care. He told her that if she didn't give him a child, he would divorce her and she wouldn't get a dime. Turns out, he had an ironclad prenup. I was stunned. It was exactly what she had tried to do to me. Assume she could control the narrative and force someone to accept her terms. But this time, she was on the receiving end. So what happened? I asked. They're getting a very messy, very public divorce, Sarah replied, shaking her head. She's losing the nice house, the fancy lifestyle, everything. She's been trying to reach out to old friends, but she burned so many bridges with her lies about you that nobody wants to deal with her. I thanked Sarah for the update and walked to my car. I didn't feel any joy in Valerie's misery, but I felt a profound sense of justice. She had tried to manipulate my life and take away my dreams. In the end, her own selfishness had been her undoing. I drove home to my pregnant wife, the nursery we were painting together, and the future I had always wanted. I had chosen not to sacrifice my dreams, and because of that, I finally had everything I ever wished for.